Mail-order bride arrived with twin babies, rejected by Groom until a widowed cowboy doctor proposed. The train rattled along the dusty tracks, each clank and hiss echoing through the quiet plains. The young woman gripped the handles of her worn leather bag, her eyes fixed on the horizon, hoping that what awaited her at the end of this long journey would be worth the hardships she had endured. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long golden rays across the prairie, and the faint smell of smoke from distant chimneys mingled with the dry, earthy scent of the wind. Her heart beat faster with each passing mile, both with excitement and an anxious fear she could not fully shake. After months of planning, saving, and dreaming, she had finally arrived at the town where her new life was supposed to begin. She had traveled far from her homeland, leaving behind a world she barely knew, filled with memories that sometimes brought a lump to her throat. She carried with her not only the little belongings she could manage, but also two small bundles wrapped carefully in blankets. She had made sure to keep the twins close, whispering soft lullabies to calm them whenever the rocking of the train made them restless. Their small faces peeked out from the blankets, eyes wide and innocent, full of curiosity and trust, unaware of the uncertainty that awaited them in this foreign land. When the train screeched to a halt, dust swirled around her feet, and she stepped down cautiously, careful not to stumble on the uneven platform. She held her children close, feeling the warmth of their small bodies against her chest. Her gaze wandered to the small cluster of buildings that made up the town. A post office, a general store, a saloon with swinging doors, and a few wooden houses. It was modest, nothing like the bustling cities she had left behind, but it held a quiet charm that made her heart flutter with hope. She took a deep breath and scanned the platform for the man she was supposed to meet, the one who had written letters to her for months, promising a future filled with stability and care. She had envisioned this moment countless times, imagining a kind man who would welcome her and the twins, offering them the home she had dreamed of. But as her eyes fell on him, her heart sank. The groom stood there, tall and imposing, dust clinging to his boots and coat. His eyes narrowed as he took in her appearance, lingering for a moment too long on the bundles in her arms. Her heart tightened, sensing the coldness in his gaze. She stepped forward, offering a shy smile, but it was met with a frown. You brought children," he said, his voice sharp, disbelief etched in every word. I did not expect this." Her chest tightened. She had hoped for understanding, for kindness, for some acknowledgement of the courage it had taken to bring the twins across the ocean. Instead, she felt the sting of rejection piercing through her like a cold wind. I did not want to leave them behind," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "They are my children, I could not," he cut her off, shaking his head. "I made an arrangement for a bride, not for this. I cannot." His words hung in the air, harsh and final. The townspeople who had gathered at the platform whispered among themselves, their voices a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Some shook their heads disapprovingly, while others glanced at her with pity. The young woman felt a flush of humiliation rising in her cheeks, but she kept her chin lifted, refusing to let despair show on her face. She could not let the twins see her fear. They depended on her strength, even when she felt none. The groom turned on his heel, leaving her standing there alone, the children's soft coos the only sound breaking the heavy silence. She swallowed the lump in her throat and took a step back, trying to steady herself. She had imagined a warm welcome, a kind word, a hand reaching out to help her with the luggage, but instead she faced cold rejection. For a moment she stood frozen, unsure what to do next. The train's whistle echoed behind her, a reminder that the journey was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. She looked around, hoping to find someone, anyone, who might offer help or guidance, but most people turned their eyes away, uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to move forward, carefully making her way toward the edge of the platform. The children stirred in her arms, sensing her tension, and she whispered gentle reassurances, stroking their hair and murmuring soft words of comfort. She could feel the weight of their small bodies, fragile and trusting, and it gave her a strange mixture of fear and determination. She had no money, no home, and now no man to welcome her, but she refused to let the situation break her spirit. Her first steps into the town were cautious. She kept her eyes on the ground at first, taking in the rough wooden sidewalks, the wagons parked along the streets, and the occasional townsfolk who paused to watch her pass. Some offered a polite nod, but most were too preoccupied with their own lives or too wary of scandal to offer assistance. The young woman clutched her bundles tightly, moving with quiet resolve, aware that every step she took was a step into uncertainty. She found a small inn at the edge of the town, its wooden sign creaking in the wind. The proprietor, a kindly older woman with a warm smile, glanced at her and raised an eyebrow. "You look tired, child," she said gently. "Traveling with little ones, I reckon." The young woman nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Yes, ma'am, I have nowhere to go. I was supposed to meet someone, but it seems he does not want me, or them." The older woman's expression softened. "Children, eh? Well, that does complicate matters. But you're welcome to stay the night. We can figure something out in the morning." Gratitude welled up inside her, and for the first time since the rejection, she allowed herself a small, weary smile. She handed over the few coins she had saved and was shown to a modest room with a bed and a small wooden table. The children's cries had quieted, and she laid them gently in a small cot, watching them sleep. As she sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion overtaking her, she thought of the life she had imagined. A home filled with laughter, a husband who would care for her and her children, a community that would welcome them. None of that had come true, and yet she refused to let despair claim her. She had survived difficult journeys before, and she would survive this as well. Outside, the town continued its evening routines. Horses were led back to their stables. The saloon doors swung open as laughter and music spilled into the street, and the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside the small inn, the young woman sat quietly, the twins resting safely beside her, and made a silent promise to herself. She would not give up. She would find a way to make this town her home, no matter the obstacles, no matter the judgment of others. The night stretched on, and as the stars appeared in the clear prairie sky, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of the letters she had exchanged, of the dreams she had held close during her long journey, and of the strength that had carried her this far. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. The town might not accept her, the groom might never return, and survival would demand every ounce of courage she possessed. But she also knew that she had the greatest motivation of all, her children. Their small lives depended on her, and she would fight for them, protect them, and give them the life they deserved, even if it meant facing rejection, loneliness, and hardship. Sleep eventually claimed her, and for the first time in days she allowed herself to rest, the twins curled safely against her. The wind whispered through the cracks in the wooden walls, carrying the faint scent of the open plains, and with it, the promise of a new beginning. Tomorrow she would step out into the town once more, determined to find a place for herself and her children. She would not let the rejection define her. She would not let fear dictate her path. She would endure, she would persevere, and she would find a way to create the life she had dreamed of, even in the face of adversity. The train had brought her to the town, but it was her courage, her determination, and her love for her children that would carry her forward. And as the morning light streamed through the small window of the inn room, casting soft beams across the floor and landing on the two tiny faces peeking out from the blankets, the young woman stirred, her body aching from the previous day's long journey and the weight of the twins in her arms. She blinked slowly, rubbing her tired eyes, but the sight of their innocent faces brought a fresh wave of determination. They depended on her, and she could not let their future be decided by rejection or misfortune. The town was waking up outside. She could hear the clip-clop of horse hooves on the dusty streets, the creak of wagon wheels, and the distant calls of shopkeepers opening for the day. A part of her longed to hide in her room and avoid the judgmental eyes she had seen at the train station, but she knew she could not. She had to face the world, no matter how unwelcoming it seemed. After dressing the twins and making sure they had something small to eat, she gathered her courage and stepped outside. The air was crisp and carried the smell of hay, leather, and fresh bread from the bakery down the street. She carried the children carefully, making her way toward the center of town. Her eyes darted around nervously, aware of the curious gazes from the townspeople. Some stared openly, whispering among themselves. Others tried to appear busy but glanced her way repeatedly. It was clear that the young bride had already become the subject of gossip. She needed work, a place to stay, and most importantly, a way to survive with her children. The town was small, but she refused to give up. She began knocking on doors, speaking with shopkeepers, and asking if they knew of any opportunities. Most shook their heads politely but firmly, saying there was little they could offer someone with children. She felt the sting of each rejection, but she pressed on, telling herself that giving up was not an option. Eventually, she came across a small inn run by an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The woman paused from her morning chores and studied the young bride carefully. "You've got little ones with you," she said gently, setting down a broom. "That makes things difficult, I suppose." "Yes, ma'am," the bride replied softly. "I've come here hoping to start a new life, but I have nowhere to go." Her voice trembled, but she stood tall, showing the strength she felt inside. The older woman's eyes softened, and she motioned toward the door. "Come inside. You can stay here for a bit. We'll see what can be done about work. It's not much, but it's a start." Relief flooded the young woman's chest. She thanked the woman and carefully carried the twins into the inn. The children gurgled softly, sensing that things might be improving. Inside, the inn was modest but clean, with wooden floors, a hearth for cooking, and a small room available for her to rest. It wasn't a palace, but it was shelter, and that was a beginning. The next few days were a blur of hard work. She swept floors, cooked meals, and tended to small chores around the inn, all while caring for her twins. She learned quickly, adapting to the routines of the town and the demands of daily life. The work was exhausting, but she refused to complain. Every night, after tucking the twins into the small cot beside her, she would sit quietly and allow herself a moment to rest, thinking of the life she hoped to build. Slowly, the townspeople began to notice her. It wasn't admiration at first, just curiosity. They saw a woman who struggled but kept going, who smiled even when her body ached and her heart felt heavy. Children playing near the inn were drawn to the twins, fascinated by their tiny hands and bright eyes. Some older residents watched quietly from porches, whispering to one another about the bride's determination. Despite the small kindnesses, there were still those who were skeptical or judgmental. A few townsfolk whispered that she didn't belong, that her children made her situation complicated, and that the town would be better without her. These words stung, but she refused to let them break her spirit. Every time doubt crept into her mind, she looked at her children and reminded herself why she had come so far. They were her purpose, her reason for enduring hardship, and she would protect them at all costs. One morning, while walking through the dusty streets to fetch water, she noticed a group of women gathered near the general store. They were chatting quietly, glancing at her and the twins as she approached. She felt a moment of panic, afraid of ridicule or insult, but as she drew closer, one of the women stepped forward. "Excuse me," the woman said kindly. "You seem tired, and with those little ones, I imagine you could use some help. There's work at my house if you need it. I can pay you something, and it's safe for the children." The bride felt her heart lift. For the first time since arriving, she experienced genuine kindness from a stranger. She thanked the woman profusely, promising to come by that afternoon. It was a small step, but it was a start, a way to begin building a life that could support her children and herself. As days turned into weeks, she found ways to manage. She learned to make the twins nap in shifts so she could complete chores and errands. She discovered that the townsfolk were more helpful than she had first thought. The children's laughter began to break down walls of suspicion. Even some of the men who had initially avoided her started offering small gestures of help, carrying bundles of firewood, lending a hand with water, or leaving bread and milk at her doorstep. Her resilience became a quiet sort of legend in the town. People whispered about the woman who refused to give up, who managed her twins with skill and patience, who kept her head high despite rejection and hardship. Some still judged her, but many began to respect her quietly. Even the children she met along the way seemed drawn to her warmth, making friends with the twins and offering small tokens of friendship. A flower picked from a garden, a small toy left behind, a simple smile. Yet, for all the small victories, there were moments of despair. Nights were long and lonely, and she often worried about money, food, and what the future held. She feared illness or injury, knowing that without help, even a small setback could be disastrous. She had no family nearby, no one to call in times of emergency. Still, she faced each challenge with quiet determination, refusing to let fear paralyze her. One particularly hot afternoon, as she walked back to the inn with the twins in her arms, she stumbled on a loose board. Her ankle twisted painfully, and she fell to the ground, the bundles nearly slipping from her arms. Panic surged through her as she clutched the children, trying to soothe their cries while struggling to regain her balance. Passers-by paused, some looking away uncomfortably, but a few rushed forward to offer help. With their support, she managed to get back on her feet, though her ankle throbbed painfully. That evening, she tended to the twins, preparing their meals and making sure they were comfortable, all while her own body ached. She considered resting, but she knew that work and persistence were her only options. Her mind wandered to the man who had rejected her, the groom who had once promised her a home and then cruelly turned away. She pushed the thought aside, refusing to let bitterness take root. Her focus was on survival, on providing for her children, and on finding a path forward. It was during one of these long, tiring days that she first noticed the doctor. He was a quiet man, known in the town for his skill and his compassionate heart. He had seen her struggling, carrying her children, working tirelessly at the inn, and he paused one day to speak. "You seem worn," he said simply, his voice calm and steady. "Those little ones take a lot of care, don't they?" She smiled faintly, grateful for the acknowledgement. "Yes, they do," she replied, "but I manage, I must." He nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. "If you ever need help, you know where to find me. I'm not far, and I have supplies if they're needed." It was a small gesture, but it planted a seed of hope. For the first time since her arrival, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she would not be entirely alone in this town. Perhaps there were people who could be trusted, people who would lend a helping hand without judgment. As the weeks continued, the young woman adapted to the rhythms of the town. She learned where to buy food, how to make do with limited resources, and how to keep her children safe and happy. She discovered quiet corners where she could rest, neighbors who offered advice and small acts of kindness, and slowly she began to carve out a place for herself. Though challenges remained, the young woman refused to let them define her. She had survived rejection, long travel, and uncertainty, and she would survive whatever came next. With her children in her arms, her determination unwavering, and a small glimmer of hope on the horizon, she faced each day with courage. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that she had the strength to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The sun was high in the sky, beating down on the dusty streets of the small town. The young woman had been walking for hours, carrying her twins and juggling the chores that never seemed to end. Her body ached from exhaustion, and her arms felt like lead from holding the children so long. Sweat soaked her hair, and her dress clung to her back, but she refused to slow down. She had learned that if she paused too long, there would be no one to care for her children, no one to help her complete the endless tasks that kept them fed, safe, and comfortable. Yet, no matter how strong she tried to appear, fatigue had begun to overtake her. She stumbled as she carried a small bucket of water, the rough handle cutting into her palm. Her ankle throbbed from a minor twist earlier in the week, and every step was a test of endurance. The twins stirred in her arms, fussing softly, sensing their mother's weariness. She murmured gentle words to soothe them, her voice calm and steady despite the trembling of her hands. As she rounded the corner near the edge of town, a shadow fell across the dusty street. She looked up to see a tall man dismounting from a sturdy horse. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a leather vest, and boots that had clearly seen years of work on the open plains. His eyes, sharp yet kind, fell immediately on her struggling figure. "Whoa there," he called, his voice carrying easily across the street. "You need help, miss." She hesitated, unsure whether to accept aid from a stranger. The town had been mostly cold to her presence, and though some people had offered small kindnesses, she had learned to be cautious. Still, the weight of the twins in her arms and the bucket of water in her hands made her realize that she had little choice. Yes, please," she admitted, her voice trembling with relief and exhaustion. The man approached carefully, his movements confident and gentle. "All right then, let's get you out of that sun before you pass out." He set his horse aside and helped her lower the twins into his arms with surprising tenderness. She felt an immediate sense of trust as he carried them to the shade of a nearby tree. "My name is Daniel," he said, introducing himself with a soft smile. "I live just beyond the town, and I'm a doctor, though I also handle ranch work. You look worn out. When's the last time you sat down properly?" The young woman shook her head, tears of exhaustion pricking her eyes. I haven't had a proper rest in days. I have to care for them, and I have no one to help me." Daniel nodded knowingly. I can see that. You're doing all this on your own. That's hard work for anyone, let alone with two little ones. Come on, I have a cabin nearby. Let's get you some shade, food, and a chance to rest. Reluctantly at first, she allowed him to lead her to his property. The cabin was small but sturdy, built from weathered timber with a stone chimney. Smoke curled lazily from the top, signaling a warm fire inside. The air smelled faintly of herbs and clean linen, a sharp contrast to the dusty streets outside. The twins were settled in a soft blanket on a nearby chair, their tiny hands reaching for the comforting warmth of the cabin. Daniel watched her carefully. "You need rest," he said gently. "I can help with the children for a while. Let's get you something to eat and check that you're all right." She hesitated, unused to such kindness from a man she barely knew. I don't want to trouble you," she said softly. "You're not troubling me," Daniel replied firmly. "It's not trouble to help someone in need. Besides, it's what I do." Over the next few hours, he helped her feed the twins, changed their blankets, and even prepared a simple meal for her. She watched in amazement as he moved with ease, handling both the children and the chores without complaint. There was a quiet confidence in him that made her feel safe, a sharp contrast to the coldness she had encountered from the groom who had rejected her. As she ate, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I didn't know anyone in this town would care enough to help." Daniel smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "People care, but you have to let them. You've been carrying so much on your own. That's admirable, but it doesn't have to be this hard." For the first time since arriving in the town, she felt a flicker of hope. Here was someone who didn't judge her for the twins, who didn't care about her past or her hardships. He only saw her effort, her courage, and her determination to survive. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's presence became a steady comfort in her life. He checked in on her and the twins, bringing medical supplies, fresh food, and sometimes even small toys for the children. He taught her ways to care for the twins more efficiently, showing her how to soothe them, feed them, and manage their routines. In return, she shared small meals she cooked for him, and slowly a quiet bond formed between them. It was during one of these visits that trouble arrived in the form of the rejected groom. He rode into town, his face twisted with anger and jealousy, having heard that she had been seen with another man. He dismounted roughly in front of Daniel's cabin, his voice loud and demanding. You think you can take her from me?" he shouted. "She belongs to me. Those children, they don't matter. She's mine by arrangement." The young woman's heart pounded in her chest, fear rising like a wave. She had hoped he had moved on, that he would leave her in peace. But his words reminded her of the rejection she had suffered at the station, the humiliation she had endured, and the danger she now faced. Daniel stepped forward calmly, his presence imposing yet controlled. "She doesn't belong to anyone except herself," he said firmly. "Those children are her life, and you have no right to threaten them or her." The groom's face reddened with anger, but Daniel's calm, steady gaze held him in check. The townspeople who had gathered at a distance murmured nervously, sensing the tension but unsure how to intervene. The groom began, but Daniel cut him off. "Leave now. If you value your reputation or your safety, you'll turn around and leave this place." The groom glared for a long moment, then spat on the ground and stormed back to his horse, muttering threats under his breath. The moment he rode away, the young woman sank to the ground, clutching the twins to her chest. Daniel knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said gently. "I won't let him, or anyone else, hurt you or the children." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not just of fear, they were of relief. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of safety and protection. She realized that Daniel was not only a healer but someone who could be trusted, someone who could help her build the life she had dreamed of. Over the following days, their bond deepened. She learned about his past, how he had lost his wife years ago, leaving him alone with the responsibility of running his ranch and caring for his patients. He spoke rarely of his grief, but his gentle words and quiet strength revealed a man who had endured hardship yet remained kind and compassionate. She shared her own story cautiously, speaking of the long journey, the letters that had promised hope, and the rejection she had faced. Daniel listened without judgment, offering empathy and understanding. His presence was steady, a calming force that allowed her to breathe more easily, to feel that perhaps she did not have to face the world alone. The twins, too, took to him quickly. They reached for him, laughed at his playful gestures, and fell asleep more peacefully when he was near. Watching this, the young woman felt a warmth in her heart she had not expected, an acknowledgement that family could be more than the one she had imagined, that love could be found even after rejection and hardship. But even as hope blossomed, she remained cautious. The memory of the groom's cruelty lingered, a reminder that not everyone in the town would accept her or her children. Yet, she found strength in Daniel's presence and in the small acts of kindness from others who had begun to respect her perseverance. Each day, she grew more confident in her ability to survive, to protect her children, and to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And so, life continued in its careful rhythm. She worked at the inn, tended to her children, and learned the ways of the town. Daniel became a constant, guiding her, protecting her, and slowly, through shared hardships and quiet moments of understanding, the seeds of trust, and perhaps something more, were planted. Though the groom's shadow lingered on the edges of her thoughts, it was no longer a force that could dominate her spirit. With Daniel by her side, she felt stronger, braver, and more capable than ever before. The journey had been long and difficult, but it was leading her toward a life she could shape, a family she could love, and a home she could finally call her own. The days grew warmer as spring stretched across the plains, painting the small town in soft shades of green and gold. Life had settled into a rhythm for the young woman, her twins, and Daniel, the widowed cowboy doctor who had become her unexpected ally, protector, and friend. The twins laughed more freely now, their tiny feet chasing each other across the cabin floor, their laughter ringing through the wooden walls like a song. The young woman watched them, her heart swelling with pride and relief, knowing that despite the hardships she had endured, her children were safe, happy, and loved. Daniel had been a steady presence, never demanding anything, always offering help quietly and thoughtfully. He taught her practical skills for the ranch, showed her how to manage her household more efficiently, and often brought little gifts for the twins. A small wooden toy, a colorful ribbon, or a soft blanket. She had come to rely on his guidance and kindness, and over time a quiet affection had grown between them. It was not a bold, passionate love at first, but something deeper. Respect, trust, and the comfort of knowing that someone genuinely cared. One afternoon, the young woman was sweeping the porch of the cabin while the twins played nearby, chasing a wooden ball back and forth. Daniel rode up on his horse, the familiar sound of hooves clattering on the wooden walkway bringing a smile to her face. He dismounted with ease, brushing dust from his boots, and greeted the twins with a warm smile. "They're getting so big," he said, crouching down to ruffle their hair. "I can hardly keep up." The twins squealed in delight, reaching for him, and she laughed softly. "They grow too fast," she admitted. "Sometimes I wish I could pause time for just a moment." Daniel nodded thoughtfully, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of tenderness and seriousness. "You've done an incredible job. Not many would manage as well as you have, and with 2 little ones no less." She felt warmth spreading through her chest. His words always carried a weight that no one else's did, a sincerity that made her feel seen in a way the townspeople never had. "I couldn't have done it without your help," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been more than I could have hoped for." Daniel's lips curved into a small smile. "We've helped each other," he replied, "and I've seen how strong you are. That strength, it's something rare, and it deserves to be honored, not overlooked." As the days passed, their connection grew stronger. They shared stories of their pasts. Daniel spoke of his late wife with quiet reverence, the loss he had endured, and the loneliness that had followed. She shared her journey from across the seas, the letters she had received, and the rejection she had faced from the man who was supposed to be her husband. Each revelation drew them closer, building a bond based on understanding, empathy, and shared resilience. The town, too, began to accept her more fully. Slowly, the gossip and judgment that had once surrounded her arrival gave way to respect and admiration. People saw her courage, the way she managed her children, and the quiet determination that carried her through each day. Children in the town came to play with the twins. Women offered to help with meals or chores, and even a few men offered their assistance when needed. The young woman had carved out a place for herself, not by pleading or demanding, but through strength, kindness, and perseverance. But even as life became steadier, the memory of the rejected groom lingered. He had left town after his angry confrontation with Daniel, but there was no guarantee he would not return. That thought kept the young woman vigilant, reminding her that while she had found safety and kindness, she could not let her guard down entirely. Daniel understood her fears and offered reassurance. "He won't bother you again," he said one evening as they watched the sun set over the plains. "And even if he did, you're not alone. We'll face it together." His words, simple yet resolute, filled her with a sense of security she had not known in months. She realized that Daniel was not only a protector, but also someone she could trust with her heart. One warm afternoon, as the twins played in the yard, Daniel approached her with a small box in hand. The young woman looked up, curious, and saw a nervous but determined expression on his face. He knelt before her, holding the box carefully. "I've watched you endure so much," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've seen your strength, your courage, and the love you have for these children, and I've realized I can't imagine my life without you and them in it." Her heart raced, and the twins paused their play, sensing the importance of the moment. Daniel opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, its silver band catching the sunlight. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he said softly. "I want to care for you, protect you, and build a family with you and these two little ones. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of joy, relief, and love. She looked at the twins, then back at Daniel, and felt a sense of completeness she had never known. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, I will." The twins squealed in delight, clapping their tiny hands, and Daniel lifted them both into his arms, spinning them around gently. Laughter filled the air, a sound so bright and full that it seemed to push away all remnants of hardship and fear. Over the following weeks, preparations for a small celebration began. It was not a grand affair, but one filled with warmth and community. The townspeople, who had once been skeptical, now offered their congratulations, bringing food, flowers, and small gifts. The young woman found herself surrounded by a support system she had not expected, people who had come to respect and care for her family. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. The cabin's porch was decorated with ribbons and wildflowers, and the twins toddled around, giggling and chasing each other. Daniel held her hands, his eyes filled with love and pride, and she felt her heart swell as she realized that the life she had dreamed of was finally within reach. "I promise to care for you," Daniel said, his voice clear and firm. "I promise to love you and these children, to support you, and to face whatever life brings us together." "I promise to stand by you," she replied, her voice steady, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. "And I promise to love you as fiercely as I love these little ones." As they exchanged their vows, the sun dipped low over the plains, casting a golden glow across the town. It was a moment of peace, a symbol of new beginnings and the triumph of courage, love, and perseverance. The young woman felt a sense of fulfillment unlike any she had ever known. She had endured rejection, hardship, and uncertainty, and yet, through resilience and kindness, she had found a family, a home, and a love that would last a lifetime. The days that followed were filled with joy and adjustment. She and Daniel worked together to manage the ranch and care for the twins, teaching them the ways of the land and the rhythms of life in the small town. They laughed together, shared stories, and supported one another through challenges. The bond between them grew stronger, rooted in mutual respect and love, and the young woman felt a sense of security she had never known before. Even the townspeople who had once doubted her now looked on with admiration. They saw not only her strength and determination, but also the love that had flourished in the cabin at the edge of town. Children ran freely, families gathered for small celebrations, and the young woman and Daniel became an example of hope, showing that even after rejection and hardship, life could offer happiness, community, and love. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, the young woman sat on the porch with Daniel beside her and the twins nestled in their laps. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the distant promise of rain. She looked around at the life she had built, the laughter of her children, the warmth of Daniel's presence, and the acceptance of the town, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. "I never thought I would find this," she whispered, her voice soft and full of wonder. "A home, a family, a life worth living." Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You earned it," he said simply, "every bit of it, and now we have all the time in the world to build something even better together." The twins reached up, tugging gently at their mother's hand, and she laughed, the sound light and joyful. Daniel lifted them both into his arms, spinning them around once more, and for a moment the world outside the cabin seemed to disappear. There was only love, laughter, and the promise of tomorrow. And so, life continued, rich with hope and filled with the quiet magic of family, perseverance, and second chances. The young woman had arrived in town with nothing but courage and love for her children. She had faced rejection, hardship, and uncertainty. Yet, through resilience, kindness, and the unexpected presence of a compassionate man, she had found the life she had dreamed of, a life filled with safety, acceptance, and love. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The twins played happily on the porch. Daniel held his beloved family close, and the young woman felt a peace that she had never known. She knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly at home. Ares shone brightly above. She felt, for the first time since the journey began, a flicker of hope in her heart. A hope that, despite the harshness of the world around her, she could carve out a place where she and her children could belong, a place where love and acceptance might one day greet them at the door.